With the frontier city of Minneapolis already at a record population high in 1870, even the best of census experts could not have predicted the enormous population boom that was to come. Between 1885 and 1895, the city almost doubled in size to a whopping 193,000 people. The transportation before that was horse-drawn wagon. People in Minneapolis were experiencing everyday difficulties with overcrowding of wagons and rotting manure. Cities out east had already created large bus-like structures pulled by teams of horses that were some of the first forms of mass transportation that were created. These were called omnibuses. The problems with the horse-drawn wagons of the pre-mass transit era were enormous. The city of Minneapolis was not as advanced as some cities out east, and the majority of roads were unpaven or brick. Another problem at that time was that there was more horses and cows than people, so the stench from the enormous piles of manure was almost unbearable. In addition, the roads and potholes held water that turned into mud. This decreased the ability of the carts to move, and sometimes they got stuck. All of these reasons called for a more creative and better transportation system that carried more people. The Twin Cities got more serious when a couple of businessmen decided to create a small line of horse cars that ran on rails. These were the horse cars, the first major transportation of that era. They built this company and were successful for a short period of time before the small venture faded. Meanwhile, a young man named Thomas Lowry made his way from Illinois after he had finished law school. He went to Minneapolis to make his fortune in this growing town. Right away, he noticed the possibilities in Minneapolis and St. Paul and started buying up as much real estate as he could, and was an enormous holder in the area from the beginning. While searching for a way to make his property more valuable, he was drawn to the horse-drawn streetcar, and in 1875, he joined the Minneapolis Street Railway Company. Within 2 years, he had substantial power within the company and had reorganized the company to fit his needs as the chair. He then started building his first horse car line from the University of Minnesota to 4th Street's downtown. At that time, it cost $6,000 for each mile of graded track, as well as $150 for each horse. These expenses were very high compared to the little that they were making at the time period, with the city limiting the fare to 5 cents. Thomas Lowry built more and more rail lines, and the company was losing money, but in 1890, the company had 218 horse cars and 1,018 horses.
Starting in the mid-1800s, when streetcars were created, they were pulled by horses. And that was the case up until 1888, when electricity became practical. Because horses were slow, horses got sick, horses produced huge quantities of manure, which was a pollution problem. Everyone was looking for some sort of a mechanical replacement for horses.
Big cities like San Francisco and New York were switching to cable cars, a form of transportation invented by Andrew Halliday, where large box-like cars were pulled along using metal cables pulled from a main power plant. These were working very well in some places, but in cold cities like Chicago, ice and snow got in the cable grooves and froze them up. This could have been a problem for Minnesota, but the street railway bought them anyways. $300,000 worth of cable cars, cable, and other equipment. Fortunately and unfortunately, they did not get to use them. Frank Sprague, an inventor, developed the electric streetcar. Stillwater, a Twin Cities suburb, was the first to try this new electric contraption, which ran on overhead wires instead of horses. These wires were fed by a main power plant that was fired by a natural gas or hydropower. Thomas Lowry had an offer from the Sprague Electric Company to supply the Minneapolis Street Railway with electric streetcars, but he needed electricity to do this. So he wrote this letter, found in the archives at the Minneapolis Public Library. In it, Lowry asked the mayor for permission to mount overhead lines and tap into the city's power grid. Soon, Lowry got his wish, and the streetcars were up and running. And so, the new era of electric streetcars was born. streetcar lines in both Minneapolis and St. Paul kept expanding, and in 1891, Thomas Lowry merged the two cities' lines together to form the Twin Cities Rapid Transit Company, or the TCRT. This was to be the new symbol for mass transportation for many years to come. The electric streetcar evolved and got better with a bigger, better body and a more comfortable inside, as well as a bigger power plant to accommodate the increase in traffic. With the streetcar lines in both Minneapolis and St. Paul doing so well, the TCRT focused on other ways to make money. They created a fleet of streetcar boats in Lake Minnetonka as an experiment. These were mostly to transport people to Big Island, where they had an amusement park. They would also transport people out to live music in the summer, as a way to create recognition for the rails. This music was held at bandshells at Lake Harriet or Minnetonka, or at a public park. The company continued building, and at its peak in 1922, it had 524 miles of track in the city, going out to suburbs like White Bear Lake and Minnetonka. Leading into the early 20th century, the TCRT at the time had the most employees out of any job in Minnesota, and was the biggest business. They continued to build up their fleet of cars and added the fleet of PCC models, with a metal body and bigger engine. The new PCC model of cars was amazing. It gave people comfort and speed. It could travel in minutes what the horse cars would have taken hours to do.
For the first time in history, a vehicle could go down the street at 30 miles an hour. This was revolutionary. Nobody had ever gone that fast.
At this point in time, the TCRT had lines going out to Minnetonka, White Bear Lake, and even Stillwater. This meant that people could start living where their cabins used to be, and still get between their house in Minnetonka and Lynn Hills and their office in downtown Minneapolis. Eventually, these areas became cities themselves, or just joined up with the city. Either way, it's amazing to see how areas that were once wilderness changed to city or suburban areas because of the streetcars. With the roaring 20s and the war over, more people were riding the streetcars than ever, and the industry peaked at 238 million riders in the year of 1920. The Depression put a great slump in the industry, closing down 16% of all tracks, and ridership went down to 100 million. But with gas and tire rationing, people did not want to use their cars, and they were riding the streetcars once again, with riders totaling 201 million. Buses had been in service for a few years, but they were starting to pick up, with 23% of all streetcar routes being replaced by busing. But in November of 1949, a group of outsiders bought out the company and decided that because of the streetcar's high maintenance rate, it would be better to convert to buses altogether and scrap the streetcars. As soon as this happened, ridership dropped dramatically, and by 1970, everything left of this great industry was gone. The streetcars in Minneapolis were the greatest innovation of the time period. They forced urban sprawl and a closer community. At one point, everyone was riding the streetcars. They also created one of the most economically successful businesses in the nation at the time. Streetcars transformed the Twin Cities and made the vast metropolitan area what it is today. The change the streetcar brought was enormous. It substantially impacted the growth of the city. The population growth of Minneapolis coincided with the growth of the streetcar industry. One wonders if this great city would be the way it is today, if not for this great innovation. Today, the Minnesota Streetcar Museum preserves segments of streetcar lines. These small fragments of track are all that remains of the immense system that made this city great.